we don't come empty to the biblical text. We come with our own biases, which we have that have shaped us from our cultural backgrounds and other things that shape us. Yeah.
Have you noticed that the Bible is weird? Of course, it's an ancient, ambiguous, and diverse book. There is no one right way to read it. Among questions and doubts, what do we do with the Bible now? Follow Pastor Cliff's responses to your pressing questions concerning the Bible. Follow him as he takes the Bible from the seminary to the street. The Bible leads us to wisdom rather than answers, and that's good news. Whether you are a frustrated Christian, barely Christian, or formerly Christian, these responses are intended for you. Responses with Pastor Cliff.
Welcome everybody to another episode on Responses with Pastor Cliff. And today I have a colleague of mine who's been going a lot through your mail, and he has picked up a pressing question that you guys have asked. And the question is, what is the Bible and where did it come from? And welcome, Steve, to Responses with Pastor Cliff. So let's have a conversation about it.
Okay. How are you, Pastor Cliff?
I'm doing well, not too bad. I wish, I was that side of the world. I know you are in Johannesburg, Pretoria area. So yeah, I'm in Cape Town. So, well, I'm not complaining much.
Yeah. There was one question that when I was reading via the emails, I've just received one burning question that struck me. And the question was, what is the Bible? What is actually the Bible, Pastor Cliff?
It's a very good question. A lot of people have asked this question, as you and I know. The Bible is actually not a book, as a lot of people would assume. It's basically a collection of literature that has been put together. And the literature varies in different times and in different contexts of ancient Israelites period. It also depends when we talk about the Bible, which era of the Bible time we're talking about. So I wouldn't say the Bible is a book as many people would assume. It's actually an ancient anthology about a particular views and politics of the day, and you also have propaganda that also comes into some of the parts of the Bible. So as we know later on, the Bible was not necessarily something that was written, but it got written much later from an orally tradition that moved into something that was now handwritten. Remember, in the ancient world, texts were not meant to be read. They were actually meant to preserve documentation and records. So it was not something that people read. As we know, many people in the ancient world couldn't read and write. Therefore, if they want to know about God, they're not going to read in a book or of some place because many of them were illiterate. They couldn't read and write, so they can't be going to a book in order for them to know what is God saying to them. So later, these books, so-called books, got organized and compiled together into one big library, and in Christian terms or Jewish terms, they will call it canonization of these pieces of literature that got put together into one body of literature. If you can imagine it more like a library that is put together. In a library, as you walk in, you'll find different books that speak about different topics. So same as the Bible, it's a collection of books. It's basically a library that you have as one body. And we know maybe it's one of the things that we'll talk about, how different books or different parts of these bodies of literature come together, and how do they actually end up being a book like we have it as a book today. Yeah. So the Bible in a nutshell is not necessarily a book, it's a collection of literature. Yeah.
Also, with what I've picked up, you are actually saying the Bible is an ancient book, basically.
Yes, of course, it's an ancient book. If you can imagine, many of the books could be dated 4,000 to even 5,000 years back. So they are not being addressed to us per se. They had a context that they were given under, and they were playing a role in the time and the context in which it was given, or the Bible authors were writing to address a particular issue. So each book addresses different issues at different times. So, and we have this rolling corpus or body of literature. It's not something that is static. So you don't have a moment in time where you have this book that is there. As people in ancient Israel are living their lives, this book gets recorded and edited and changed over time. So, in other words, the more you go back in time, the more the text changes. In other words, because it took different shapes and forms over time. So it wasn't something that was fixed. Only later, when it was canonized, then we have a fixed form or a frozen form of the Bible, if you would call it that. Yeah.
Okay, for someone who doesn't understand what you mean by canonization of the book.
Okay, canon is basically when the church set to decide which books they're going to go with in terms of books that formulate their or support their doctrine. So they sat together and chose different books, and there were other books that were left behind because they didn't support what the Christian ideas of God and Jesus and even the God of the Old Testament were saying. So they left some of those books out. So if you go back, I mean, the term canon is quite broad. I mean, there are different canons. For example, you have a Jewish canon, which would be different to a Protestant canon, and it will also be different to an Orthodox canon, and it will also be different to a Catholic canon. So there are canons. So it depends on which one you are exposed to. But those books are systematically chosen by a particular group to say these are the books we're going to go with, and it forms their reading. So in other words, the Bible is actually a product of the church, if you call it that, or the canon is a product of the church or different faith traditions that chose to, select those books that these books are what we're going to agree on as a community, and this is what we're going to read as the basis of our interpretation and the basis that informs our tradition and religious experience. Yeah.
And I heard you using the word like context. What do you mean for our viewers who don't understand the word context? You have used it quite a lot in your saying.
Well, by context, I mean we all live in a context. We are all a product of a context. For example, if I would say we are living in 2022 now, in September, and many of us live in South Africa, I assume, and some live in different parts of the world, and it's what informs them. And many of us are exposed to different cultures. We come from different cultural backgrounds, and that cultural background informs who I am. So I'm a product of time and culture and social politics and politics of the day, and I cannot redefine myself in any other way. So I'm a product of my own time. So biblical people had their time as well. So they are part of a particular culture, which would be the ancient Near East at that time, and they're located in a specific time and place and moment. And there were also politics of their day. There were also social economics of their day. So when they are writing or interpreting what they deem as their experience with God, they would bring that into their understanding of God and understanding of reality. So that shapes who they are. So hence I say context. So when we are reading the biblical text, we have to understand their context so that we can understand more or less how they would have seen things and view things and viewed reality for their time, not for our time. So we are actually 4,000 years away, or even 5,000 years, or even 2,000 years from what we're actually reading about from the biblical text. So we have to consider their context because it made them, it shaped them. Just like us, we don't come empty to the biblical text. We come with our own biases, which we have that have shaped us from our cultural backgrounds and other things that shape us. Social economics and stuff like that. Yeah.
To ensure that we keep bringing you tough conversations like these, please support our ministry by donating as little as 50 Rand per month. You can find our banking details on our website, hulusoministries.co.za.
Okay, so one other burning question that I read is the Bible infallible or fallible?
Yeah, well, look, these terms have been sort of propagated by people who want to make an assumption that what you find in the biblical record was actually verbatimly stated by God. So, which is not the case if you study how ancient literature was compiled, which in this sense would apply to the biblical text. These people were actually interpreting how God was dealing with them in their own words. So, what they are writing, it's their own words in terms of how they also interpret their own experience and the movement of God in their reality. So context also is key there. So of course, in different contexts, there and anybody's experience would obviously differ. My experience is totally different to your experience. So how we view one's dealing with God would not be the same. So therefore, we can say that the biblical text, the words are basically perfect, because anything that is constructed by a human being, you'll get mistakes. But we won't say that God Himself is fallible. You know, we can agree, you and I, that God is infallible. But the scriptures, we find that people have strange ideas because of, I mean, they're a product of the time. As I say, they would say some strange things that we may question today, but that doesn't mean what they have recorded is actually the words of God. It's their words about what they think, their interpretation of God. Therefore, we can say the scriptures are fallible, but God is not, it's infallible. You see, because scriptures are man-made, so I would say the Bible is the words of man about God, not the other way around. Yeah. So it's not God who's writing verbatimly what we find in the biblical text. Hence, when that happens, we can see the Bible for what it is, because it's messy and it's imperfect, because it's made by imperfect human beings. Yeah.
Okay, no, I hear you, Pastor Cliff. So, can we find absolute truth, therefore, in the book?
Well, that's a very loaded question. That's a very good question. Look, truth is what we agree upon as a community. As I said earlier, these books were canonized by the church, so they agreed this is going to be what we deem as truth for us, okay, at different times. So even today, when we are grappling with scripture, we are trying to agree as a community to say this will be truthful for us, but it doesn't mean what is true for us would be true in the general sense of the word to everybody else, meaning to universalize that. So that something like that doesn't exist. Therefore, when we come into the Bible, we're not actually looking for absolute truth, but we're looking for what we can extrapolate as lessons that we can deem as truthful to us as a community. So remember, scripture is always read and always best read in a community, not as an individualistic thing. So yeah, so it's very dangerous to come up with answers alone and say this is truth, because truth, as I said earlier on, that the Bible is a product of a group, so it was never a one-man thing. So that becomes truthful in terms of how we interpret the scripture as a community. That's what we deem as truth. But that's the truth. We just got to be aware that what we're deeming as truth is actually only relevant to us as a community, not to everybody else that is outside the community.
So the word truth is quite loaded. It's not just the way we use it, truth, but the way you are deliberating upon it, it's quite loaded. It's not just truth. Truth is not just truth. It means you need to understand what do you mean, what is truth. So explain to us more, what do you mean by truth? It's loaded. Like truth, it's a communal thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good question, because what I'm saying, in anything that we do, as I said, we're a product of our own cultures and communities where we come from, which shapes our context and which shapes the lens in which we, read anything, whether we're reading a book or a newspaper or even the Bible itself, because we are always interpreting based on the lens that has shaped us to be whom we are. Therefore, truth for us becomes then subjective. In other words, you don't get to an objectivity to say this is absolutely correct because it's shaped by your context, your lens, that helps you to view things or interpret things in a particular way. So everything that human beings do, whether they're reading or engaging in some sort of a study, they are actually subjectively extrapolating or interpreting what they're reading. So those subjectivity for that community ends up becoming something they deem as objectivity, if you understand what I mean. So objectivity is, as I said, is communal. So the term truth, we use it loosely, as I said, to say that this is the truth, but we know that there is no absolute. Basically, it's subjectivity that becomes deemed as something that is objective in a particular community, not necessarily outside that community.
One burning question that I read in the email was, did the ancient Israelite practice ancestralism?
Yeah, well, we did mention it in some of the videos, the last video that we posted in response to that question. It's actually a burning question for a lot of our African people because many of them come from that background. And as soon as they enter into Christianity, they are basically told to, shun that practice because it's viewed as something that is demonic. But if we look at the Bible for what it is, the more, as I said, the more you go back in time, the more the Bible changes shape. So what was actually taking place prior to us having documents in the ancient world, things were practiced, as I addressed it in the last video, that we had something called family religion. So a family religion was definitely led by the fathers. It was mainly patrilineal, meaning male dominated, and it evolved or elevated the male figures within the families. So this was the practice. And even the names of the biblical characters that you read about, you'll find that they have these names that evoke these ancestors, which whom they would have viewed as their benefactors, meaning their helpers. And it was practiced, of course, as part of our family religion. But now later Bible writers didn't like this type of thing, especially when state religion kicked in around the time of the kings in Israel, which is about 1000 BC, which would be David's time. But it doesn't necessarily mean the general population did stop practicing family religion. So remember, texts were there to keep record, and they don't necessarily resemble what was actually happening on the ground. So people were just going on about their lives and doing what they know best. And we find that in archaeological evidence, we see that they would evoke these deities and even have meals towards their families, departed relatives, and they even had high places which they went to once a month, and once a year they had this big feast to evoke their departed relatives. That was to ask for blessings so that they can have longevity in health, and also prosper in everything that they were doing. So they believed that. So we know that later Bible writers didn't like that, and they tried to clean it up from the Bible. But some of the names give us clues. I mean, you have the son of Samuel is called within the Canaanite name Baal, Baal, meaning the fire of Baal. And later Bible writers change it to Ishbosheth, meaning man of shame. So we can see already, as I said, the more you go back in time, the scriptures look different. So the earlier stages, you would have seen that the name of Saul's son was Ishbaal, meaning, Baal is one of the primary gods in Canaan, and Baal was prayed for in order to give them rain. Sometimes the name Baal doesn't actually mean a god, but also means a father, so in Hebrew, so an ancestor, in other words. So we know that Baal even the name father, even the name Ach, which is a brother, also later means ancestor or is interchangeably used. And even the word Achi for brother and Ami for uncle. So those names, uncle, father, brother, sometimes they mean ancestor, not necessarily brother, uncle, or father. So they did do this, but it's very subtle in the biblical text because they've tried to clean it up, the later Bible writers.
Okay. You quite invoke a lot of family religion. Maybe for those who didn't watch your video when you spoke about family religion, can you please deliberate and debunk more on what do you mean by family religion?
Well, ancient Israelites didn't, have a church. They didn't have a synagogue that they went to a temple. Such things didn't exist at the time. So anything they worshipped or would have practiced was deemed as religion, but it was mainly done in their homes. So, and it was led by the head of the household, which was typically a father figure. So they did all these things in the house. So for them, eating, whether working in the field or whether preparing a meal or whether cleaning oneself or washing their clothes, it was regarded as religion. So you couldn't separate the two from life and religion itself, as we do today in modern day world. Hence I said context is also key as well. So they had a context. This is how they were doing things, and they did things from their household, and each household had what we call personal gods or personal piety, if I was calling that. And you would often find it in formulas in the books of like Genesis, where it says the God of so and so, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, because you can see these are the gods of the household of Jacob. But in other families, like where Jacob gets a wife in Laban's house, Laban has his own gods. I mean, he even chases Jacob to say, "You have stolen my family gods." So we can see that religion was practiced in their households, and each household would have been different to another household. So it was not a structural or formalized that kind of religion, because it was something that was done in the homes.
You said something that is very interesting. The Israelites, they were not, they didn't have a religion per se, but their life was what we call today religion. Did I hear you correctly?
Yeah, yes. In other words, they couldn't separate their normal day-to-day practice to say, now I'm going to church. This is a religion for me. Such a thing didn't exist for them. For them, religion was a way of life. So when they were just going about their business, that's religion for them. There's no set time to say, now I'm going to practice religion like we do today. Yeah.
No, thank you, Pastor Cliff, for the responses to your question. We hope we'll meet again next time.
Thank you so much, Steve, for your time, and I hope our viewers at home have enjoyed this interaction between us as we try to respond to some of their questions the best way we know how. Sometimes, unfortunately, we may not have the answers, but we try our best to give you answers. But if you want to see if we may be tackling some of your questions on another episode, keep on subscribing and liking us on our channel, and you may be lucky on the day we may be treating your question. Thank you very much, and stay blessed, and until we see each other once again, goodbye.
Puluso Ministries is a non-profit educational enterprise founded in 2019. The ministry is informed by academic scholarship. At Puluso, we embrace multiple perspectives in our engagement with Scripture. We seek to provide non-Christians and Christians from all backgrounds and denominations with resources that provide an honest intellectual engagement with the Bible. We embrace multiple perspectives in fostering a more open, moderate society into the 21st century and beyond.
To ensure that we keep bringing you tough conversations like these, please support our ministry by donating as little as 50 Rand per month. You You can find our banking details on our website, hulusoministries.co.za.